Hey, Nation, Harry here, and happy 2020. We are back going around the horn talking to our esteemed analyst, and I'm with Alex Field from Success Computer Consulting. Did I get that right?
Yep.
All right, out of Minneapolis. And Alex, you are a prolific contributor to the community, as it were, and so it begs the question: is new decade, new year? Are you updating the book that we often reference? What's going on? What do you have on your plate in terms of some writing and projects?
Yeah, it's a pretty full year. I think I'm going to have probably some conferences and things like that as well. But right now, I'm working on getting the guide fully updated. It should actually be done pretty soon, probably by the end of the month. The guide that I had previously written on Microsoft 365 Business was a really good overview of the product and had a lot of details on how to implement a lot of the different components of it. But I really wanted to update that to help folks along the migration path. And so that's kind of what I've been working on, and it's almost done now. I'm gonna have an editor look at it and so forth, and then make it look pretty for publishing and make that go live. But the idea is to help people understand the migration is different than a migration that they would have done, say, from like one version of SBS server to another, because in that case, the goal was to have as little interruption to the users as possible, and you're basically swapping out like for like. Like, we used to have email, and we still have email, and just on a different server now, and we used to have file servers, and we still have that file functionality, and it's just on a different server, and we just want to make that as smooth of a transition as possible and let you get back to work. But in Microsoft 365 Business, we're actually moving to a completely different architecture, and it's a new platform that has tools that do things that your old system never could do, and that's a change. And so it requires a little bit more finesse as you move through the migration path. As you're moving files across, you can't just use like a copy paste. You're not going to use Robocopy or something. There is no Robocopy. There are tools out there that help you copy files in bulk and bring them to places like OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. But the fact is, like, there's also an adoption process to go through when you're bringing on some of those applications, and people are getting to learn some of those new tools. When do I use what when? When do I put files in OneDrive versus Teams versus SharePoint and so forth? And so the user ends up having to become a little bit more involved. They have a responsibility to learn these new tools and adopt them. So it's not just an IT-driven project. And I think that's the hardest part for people to grasp. And I think that's the reason for a lot of the friction and some of the road bumps that people move across or that they run into, and that can cause a bad experience for users, is because they didn't prepare correctly. They were moving at the migration like it was an old style migration, but it's not. It's a whole new system. We have to go through a transformation, not just a migration. So that's kind of the topic of it. And so I hope to have that available pretty soon. And
yeah, I was going to say maybe in 4 to 6 weeks when we circle back to you, maybe it'll be out, or
yeah, for sure, okay. Absolutely.
We'll get it up on the screen. Now, what I'm hearing is, well, a couple of things. Back in the day, and I do too much of that when I'm giving context, but Jeff Middleton, a Microsoft MVP, 2004 through 2010, had a SBS swing migration kit that was pretty popular. And at the end of the day, it wasn't so much automation tools that he provided, but prescriptive guidance. Number one, it sounds like you're providing prescriptive guidance. Number two, I believe down to the procedural level, right? The keystroke level, which is what Jeff also did. So that's really cool that you're not doing this high level, dummies book that people can read on an airplane about what are migrations.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty cool. And then I also like the fact that you're hitting the file conversation head on, because for too long, and I'm not being critical, but we've had in our space a couple of vendors. So let's just name BitTitan, Skykick. We've had some vendors in our space that have really targeted the email migration piece, and that all made sense at the time. But to your point, they to my recollection, they weren't really getting into the file structures, the files themselves, and so on. So it sounds like that's where you come in. Is that fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is going to be the year too. I mean, obviously SBS, its end of life is now here for even the last version of SBS 2011. So if you still got it, you got to get off of it. And there's some folks who went to other versions of Windows Server like 2012 and 2012 R2 and so forth, 2016. And those, especially in the small to mid-sized business, there's not a single person I meet with today who's like, yeah, we really want to keep our server. Most people are the opposite. They want to, get away from being in the data center business, and they realize that most of what they want to accomplish is available in the cloud, and sometimes it's even got bells and whistles that they wish they would have had a long time ago, and they still, so it's now the time for digital transformation. I think the first mass exodus was definitely email. The next one is certainly going to be files, and that's one of the last dependencies that people will have to remove from their old networks before they can be, completely untethered. So that's kind of where I'm going to be spending a lot of time, I think, in 2020, is just helping people understand the process for file migrations to a platform like Microsoft 365, what it works for and what it doesn't work for, because there's some things that your file server could do that the cloud can't. Even though the cloud can do a whole lot that the file server never could, it's also the reverse is also true. So you have to understand, and that's kind of the gist of it, is that I want to be able to lay that out there and give people some guidance around not only where to put the stuff, but then how to put it there, as you mentioned.
All righty. Well, sir, stay warm up there. And if I'm correct, both my Seattle Seahawks and your Minnesota Vikings have officially been eliminated from the NFL playoffs. So we can see more ways for us to get along. We have more in common than pulls us apart. So, All right. Have a great month. We'll circle back to you about your new guide. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.